Welcome to the very first U.S. Food Waste Pact Town Hall. I am ReFed's Communications Coordinator, Nia D'Amelio, and I will be serving as today's host and moderator. So today we're going to be talking about the history of the pact, our work to date, and where we plan to go. And then, like I said, we'd like to open it up to you all for questions. We will also be sharing a survey later in the presentation with you here and in the follow-up email to record your feedback about the pact and its programs. So be ready for that. It's going to come in a link in the chat and also in QR code on slide. So be ready however you need to be ready. Like I said, my name is Nia D'Amelio. I'm the communications coordinator at ReFed, and I proudly serve as the communications coordinator for the Pact as well. And with me are three of my incredible colleagues. First is my ReFed colleague, Jackie Suggett, who has spent more than 10 years working in sustainable food systems. She oversees ReFed's work with food businesses, including both one-on-one strategic advisory support and the U.S. Food Waste Pact and Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, which you will hear a lot about today. Jackie also leads ReFed's community engagement efforts, which include overseeing the Food Waste Action Network and our annual Food Waste Solutions Summit, which I'm sure many of you have been to before. Before joining ReFed, Jackie worked on Walmart's sustainability team, where she led a number of sustainable food and nutrition programs for Walmart's global and private brand business. So, kind of a full circle moment for Jackie. With us as well is Ann Gartzka, who is the Senior Program Officer for Circular Supply Chain Business Engagement for the Food Loss and Waste team at World Wildlife Fund. She supports private and public sector stakeholders to work towards a more circular food supply chain, specifically project management, business engagement, and communications surrounding voluntary agreement programs, including the PCFWC and the Pact. And her work includes business convenings to work pre-competitively towards shared food waste reduction goals through sector summits, working groups, and pilot projects, which I know that she is going to detail in short order for us. And last joining us is Tara Dalton, who is the Circular Supply Chain Manager for the Food Loss and Waste team at the World Wildlife Fund. She oversees the U.S. Food Waste Pact, and during her tenure, she has grown the business engagement in the Pact by steering pilot projects and multi-sector working groups that promote innovative solutions and accelerate progress toward our food waste prevention targets. And she will be telling you about our plans to grow and move toward a more impactful future. So that is our panel today, and that is what's on the docket. So with that, I will turn it over to Jackie, who's going to talk a little bit more about the food waste problem and the Pact's place in it.
Thank you, Nia, and holy smokes, so many recognizable names in the chat here, also lots of names I don't know, so great to see you all, and I'm personally just very excited to be here today and just celebrate this moment. I think both for what has been accomplished in the US to date and all the work that we certainly still have in front of us going forward. But before I give a brief history lesson here in a minute, I did want to recenter us a little bit on why food waste and why does this issue justify the work of collaboration and working together at a systems level, at a national level, at a regional level, across sectors. Recognizing a lot of this data will be familiar to many people on the call. I think just, as I said, want to recenter us on kind of a few key points that I'm sure will come up throughout the conversation today. The first being, that about 38% of food produced in the US goes unsold or uneaten. This, as it says, is a $473 billion with a B dollar opportunity. If we look specifically in the food business sector, we're still looking over a $200 billion opportunity for food businesses. And then if we put our consumer hats on for a second too, and I think about just what we've experienced walking into stores the last few years with inflation, and just visible challenges throughout our supply chain, I think this issue becomes even more prominent. We also know that for consumers, the cost is over $750 a person per year on food that they aren't actually consuming at the end of the day. Beyond the economics, there's obviously environmental and social impacts for this as well. Resource use among many, right? So we have About 22% of freshwater use is one example. Methane is a hot topic right now, which I hope you join us tomorrow for a webinar all about methane. But we know that that landfills are the third largest producer of methane, and that food waste is number one material in our landfills. So conservatively, we're looking north of 58% of methane coming out of landfills coming from food waste. So a big opportunity to be diverting and preventing food waste there. And then finally, we know that 1 in 8 Americans are food insecure. So this certainly becomes very closely tied with food access and food security. So across the economics, the environment, and social, lots of integrations and lots of, again, just justifications for the amount of focus and effort being put on this work. As this slide shows, food waste is also a systemic issue. And I don't just mean that because it happens across the food system, which is certainly true, and we've quantified that here. But it's also systemic because the causes and solutions to food waste must be systemic. If we look at the pretty numbers and delineations on this chart, I think we have to recognize that it's not as simple as that. A head of broccoli on farm being wasted is very different than the one I throw in the compost or the garbage in my home. We also know that head of broccoli that goes to waste on farm may not actually go to waste because of decisions, policies, behaviors that happen on farm. It may go to waste because of decisions, policies, and behaviors that happen in the middle of the supply chain, or again, in my home and where I vote to spend my dollars. So that complexity is really what draws us to the systemic nature of food waste. And for us, thinking about the pact and pre-competitive voluntary agreements more broadly is a key driver for why we want to foster collaboration, both within and between sectors, to start tackling some of these sticky issues. So with that in mind, let's talk about the pact. And the story of the U.S. Food Waste Pact really starts long before it was launched last December. Data-driven and action-oriented pre-competitive work in the U.S. really started with the formation of the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment back in 2018-2019 timeframe. Jurisdictions along the West Coast, many of them who I actually see in the chat, so applause and shout out to them, decided that they wanted to make a focused effort on reducing regional food waste by partnering with the private sector. And as a result, I'm simplifying, but the PCFWC was born out of that effort, which was really the first public-private partnership focused on food waste reduction in the US. So after about 5 years of building that model, including the challenging work through the years of COVID, we were starting to see very exciting impacts. Just in the data report that we launched earlier this year, I think around in April, we showed some of those results, such as 28% reduction in unsold food rates, 20% increase in food donations. We've also run a host of pilot projects everywhere from very high-tech AI tools down to very low-tech frontline worker engagement that have independently shown results ranging from 15 to 70% food waste reduction through those pilots. So a lot of exciting momentum. At the same time, we were starting to see a growing interest from players outside of the West Coast region, really looking to that region as leaders and saying, how do we replicate? How do we engage? How do we partner? We also saw national models popping up around the world, such as the Cortal Agreement, which actually predates all this work, Pacto por la Comida in Mexico, the Australian Food Waste Pact, lots of similar models around the world. So we were excited then to scale the successes of the West Coast Project to a national program by launching the U.S. Food Waste Pact in December of last year. So what is this pact we speak of? For those of you who are not part of it or are less familiar, it is a national voluntary agreement led by the nonprofits ReFed and World Wildlife Fund, specifically building on this Target Measure Act framework that both the CFWC as well as international models often build around. So we work to bring in leading food businesses across sectors like retail, manufacturing, food service, quick service restaurants, and others, again, to work within and between sectors to partner on this issue of food waste. We also facilitate data and measurement on key food waste metrics by providing sector-specific tools, industry benchmarking, and then valuable data products back to our signatories. And finally, we engage these businesses through topic and sector-based working groups and high-impact pilot projects, which has already been alluded to and we'll be talking about in much more depth later and giving some great examples of the actual work that's coming out of those. Beyond the specifics of the what we do, we are very excited kind of philosophically through the pact to be engaging with the food sector in new ways and be contributing to and creating kind of a cohesive fabric that can support all of the amazing work that's happening through other initiatives and partnerships focused on food waste. As this slide indicates, we are far from the only people working on this topic, and this slide in itself is a very small representation of universities, city and state governments, and so many others that are doing amazing work and making amazing progress on the issue of food waste. So we hope to be a unifying force alongside these other amazing partners so that we can be sharing best practices and coordinating our collective work and efforts on food waste in the US. As a couple of first steps to do that, I want to kind of talk through two final things before I pass it off. The first is we are excited to launch our inaugural advisory council for the U.S. Food Waste Pact, including the members highlighted here, and there may be others who will be joining in the coming months as well. And we're very excited to have representation from these leaders across the food system to help shape and inform the U.S. Food Waste Pact, as well as help to identify where there may be opportunities and synergies between our work and other work happening by those on the previous slide, as well as others not pictured yet. So just an initial thank you, a shout out to our advisory council members. We'll be engaging in more depth as we get into the new year, but very grateful for their time and willingness to come work with us. Alongside that, we are also excited to start piloting some new ways to engage signatories in the pact. Today, we are excited to announce our first coalition member, which I'll talk more about that in a second, but this is Healthcare Without Harm. I believe I saw them in the chat as well. So more applause I see coming up. Thank you. Founded over 30 years ago, Healthcare Without Harm is an international organization dedicated to providing resources, knowledge, and inspiration to the healthcare sector, leading several initiatives to make it more sustainable and reduce its environmental impact. So joining us is our first coalition partner. What a coalition partner is these are signatories with an existing membership base, in this case, thousands of hospitals around the country. And these businesses individually perhaps are ones that we wouldn't necessarily be able to engage with individually through the pact, if we think of just the quantity of hospitals in this network, for example. But we are now able to learn from their efforts, as well as scale the tools, projects, and learnings of the pact more broadly within these different sectors. So again, just congratulations and welcome to the Healthcare Without Harm team. We're also excited to be announcing a few more coalition partners, as well as several new signatories in the coming weeks. So join me in welcoming them. With that, I am excited to transition it over to Anne, who's really going to dive into the details of what we've been up to. As we transition, we're going to have a few of these questions that we pop up throughout the webinar today. Then again, we encourage you to use the chat to share your answers. The first is just as we think about how to best support the broader food system through the pact and through our partners that we're working with through the Advisory Council and elsewhere, what barriers or challenges are interfering or slowing perhaps your ability to address food waste within your organization and or those that you work with? So take some time, ponder that either now through the chat or in follow-up. Please share your feedback. And as I said, we'll have a few more questions yet to come. And with that, I will pass it over to Anne.
Hey, Jackie, I'm really excited to share some of the work we've been doing and that it's planned. It's really rewarding to see so much happening for us as a team and as a broader food waste community. If you can go to the next slide, please. Actually, next slide. So I want to just let you all know who we are working with currently, but this is a growing community of food businesses. So we have currently 15 signatories committed to the voluntary agreement across 4 business sectors: manufacturing, food service, quick service restaurants, and grocery retail. And as Jackie just said, we have more coming here in the next few months. So definitely stay tuned to our LinkedIn and other channels to be aware of how this group of signatories is growing and expanding into new areas. The leaders from these organizations they're just so fantastic in the sense of the time that they're investing and the commitment they're making to join us in our pre-collaborative forums, the working groups, and the sector summits. They really afford an opportunity for them to learn from each other, as well as being kept informed on industry best practices and trends. We know there's a lot of information that comes out, new data, new insights, and we really try to bring this to them so that they can be really informed participants in helping us move things forward with reducing food waste in our communities. I do want to highlight just anecdotally the power of these peer groups. I think many of you are familiar with one of our sort of most well-known case case studies, which was the work led by Julia Pearson at Bob's Red Mill, which was an employee engagement pilot that led to some significant waste reduction in their operations. She brought that work to the group, and through her sharing her representation of the work, led to two other manufacturers raising their hands, Land O'Lakes and Fresh Del Monte, and saying, we loved hearing what you did and we want to be part of that. And so that's the kind of opportunity and inspiration that comes from these folks getting together in a forum that they otherwise might not get together. But I want to get into some of the details of the work to really showcase how the progress has happened and where we're going to go with that. So if we could go to the next slide. I want to share the work in one of the areas where we've made pretty significant investments in terms of pilots, and that is whole chain pilots. For those of you not familiar with what a whole chain pilot entails, it is an effort that is a collaborative effort across the supply chain, looking to reduce waste, improve resource efficiency, involving at least two, if not more, stages of the value chain. So instead of focusing on solutions at a single entity, it's involving 2, 3, 4, or more entities across the value chain. So to date, under the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and continuing with the U.S. Food Waste Pact, we have 6 projects in various states of progress or completion. The first 2 I want to share are in the potato commodity sector. The first project starts with just asking the question of where is food waste happening? So it was a hotspot identification effort that led us to find where that waste was occurring. The second pilot went on to look at solutions targeting that stage in that whole chain. Turns out processing is where the largest waste occurs. And so we're digging into that. That case study is wrapping up like right now. It'll be available on the PCFWC and US Food Waste Pact website. So definitely keep your eyes open for that. And you can learn more about what we found and the solutions that are being recommended and identified in a way that can be taken to other organizations. The solutions are not potato specific. They can be transformed and carried over to other organizations. The second group of pilots is in the strawberry commodity chain. Again, we started with where is it happening in that value chain, and you learn new things. In this case, we learned that the greatest loss was occurring at the farm stage, not processing, not at the retail stage, but at the farm stage. And so what the second case study and pilot will focus on is how do we address the fact you have a tremendous volume of harvestable fruit that's actually not leaving the field. So looking at solutions around new product lines, new sales channels to take advantage of the food that's grown, but otherwise not reaching a table, not reaching somebody's home. Now, recognizing these are big change, we're talking national level potato value chains, national level strawberry value chains, have their own flavor. We've actually pivoted and we have a whole chain pilot focusing on plums, but at the regional level. So all of the players in this pilot reside and operate in the Pacific Northwest. So there is also understanding the value chain of plums, but also understanding how a regional value chain operates and has unique opportunities and challenges that are distinct from the national. So we're really excited for that double learning out of that pilot. And then finally, we are getting ready to kick off some efforts for 2025, looking at commodities in dairy and beef, focusing on high volume, high value food items flowing to grocery retailers. So this is going to be a significant insight into some of the food items that are on our tables every day. And we'll learn from that and be able to share that later on in 2025. So shifting from value chains to employee engagement, this is a very different focus. And I think one of those, it's really meaningful for all of us because it's really talking to the individuals in the stores, in the facilities who see, respond to, and have insight on food waste. It's the frontline team members who really just, they feel it, they see it, and sometimes feel unable to take as much action as they would like. So the 3 intervention pilots that we have run, again, going back to the earlier one I mentioned with Bob's Red Mill, focused on the employees at Bob's Red Mill, Land O'Lakes, and Fresh Del Monte. And while they're all 3 manufacturing, they all 3 are very different manufacturing facilities. Dry goods at Bob's Red Mill, prepared food products at Land O'Lakes, and fresh fruit at Fresh Del Monte. So subtleties in the way they operate, subtleties in the way their team members engage with food waste. And so regardless of those differences, we all brought education, inspiration, and engagement to those team members so they could feel part of addressing food waste in those locations. And those employees leaned in. And it's really exciting to see how empowerment of those team members can really bring significant change. We saw a 70% savings or reduction in food waste at Bob's Red Mill, 74% at Land O'Lakes, and we're excited to see some similar results forthcoming from Fresh Del Monte. Their case study should be out a little bit later. So again, pay attention to our channels because there will be news there. What's also exciting is the solutions were super simple. Bob's Red Mill was made possible by the tightening of a screw in a process line. Literally, somebody just went in with a screwdriver and brought that kind of savings. Land O'Lakes, they changed a step in a process and introduced the use of a spatula in terms of a turnover of a line. Again, it brought us significant savings, and we're excited to say we're going to see some similar, simple, scalable solutions with Fresh Del Monte. So again, talking to the people really can just bring so much insight. Now, again, going back to that, like jumping the fence, sharing within the peer group, our food service signatories heard about the success of these and said, hey, this sounds like something we can bring over to our sector. And so we've also kicked off a pilot that's looking at deploying employee engagement in kitchen operations. So we're looking at the same type of approach in corporate campuses, collegiate campuses, and then within collegiate, self-operated, and then corporate food service operated kitchens. So to get a wide range of perspective on how we can engage employees in those operations, that will be coming in early 2025. So again, keep an eye out for that. And then finally, before I leave this, I want to close with the fact that we've seen so much demand and excitement around this type of engagement that we want to scale and make this available to more than just the signatories. And so we've invested in an open source toolkit and something that can be taken off the shelf and executed by anyone. So we're hoping to have available in early next year a toolkit that will explain how to execute an employee engagement pilot, whether you're in manufacturing, grocery retail, hospitality, distribution, so that this can reach more people than we could ever reach if we were working one-on-one through our signatory. So we're excited to see that come out in early next year. So with that, I'm going to turn to the question I get to ask of you all, which is, what would you like us to work on going forward? So imagine you get to write your own case study and you want to give it the title that explains the progress and the power of that work. So what would be the title of a pilot case study that you would want to see us publish? Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't wordsmith it. Just throw out what you think that title would be. Drop that in the chat. We'd love to see what you think we should be working on. And with that, while you're working on that, I'm going to pass this over to Tara for the next set of information. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you. I'm looking forward to turning now to talking about what's next, where our U.S. Food Waste Pact ambitions taking us. It's so exciting to be talking to you all today because we're at the cusp of a critical phase for not just the U.S. Food Waste Pact, but really all those working in this space, as I know 90% of you on this call are. But it's a particularly critical time for those who have aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. While it's been amazing to see our nation's food loss and waste programs and policies rapidly grow and mature, I think we're all realizing the urgency behind the fact that we only have 5 more years to go to 2030. In the PAC's inaugural year, ReFed and WWF took time to establish our base, ensuring the model that was so well tested by the PCFWC on the West Coast could be scaled nationally and had the proper governance structures in place. So we are now ready to create a robust strategic plan that we are calling our Roadmap to 2030. Over the next 6 months, we will create this roadmap that sets growth targets and strategies to help guide the PAC's focus. We will create the roadmap using research and input from internal stakeholders, such as our business signatories and advisory council, and external stakeholders, which can be thought of as all other parties, government, solution providers, academic institutions, etc. We know that every food business should have ambition around reducing their food loss and waste. And so to grow our numbers and scale up our impact, we plan to grow our outreach efforts and better communicate the business and environmental case for focusing on food waste. The strategies we plan to pursue are 1, grow our signatory base both in the sectors we have currently represented, and 2, grow into additional sectors because they all have a role to play that influences waste both in their operations and up and down the supply chain. Thirdly, we will also develop supportive partnerships that inspire and enable strong private sector action, particularly with the stakeholders I mentioned before: public sector governing bodies, solution providers, academia, consumer-facing groups. And finally, we will measure our progress and set intermediate goals between now and 50% by 2030. This will be publicly reported, just as the PCFWC annually reported our progress toward this shared goal. This diagram showcases our approach for engaging with the different groups of stakeholders under the Pact. When we think about growing our reach and impact, the ultimate goal is to engage businesses in the food industry as Pact members, that middle circle there. Focusing on activating the stakeholder group to take action to reduce their food loss and waste will remain our focus and our ultimate target stakeholder group. But we will be active partners with a multitude of other stakeholders who have influence on the supply chain, namely the public sector, consumers, and solution providers. We will focus on engaging with the public sector by encouraging a back and forth dialogue between businesses and policymakers. We will also serve as a forum for bringing solution providers to the table, whether they be nonprofits or innovative tech companies, to feed into private sector strategies and solutions to food loss and waste. And finally, we will engage businesses in taking action to impact consumer food waste in the household or through dining and events. I'll now go into each circle just a bit more in depth, discussing how we plan to engage with that stakeholder group. As I mentioned, businesses are our target locus of influence. We started in the PCFWC with focusing on retail and expanded year upon year to reach other sectors. But retail was a good place to start because it's a critical juncture between supply and demand, and they are consumer facing, so potentially have a great deal of influence to play over household level waste. So while continuing to grow representation in our current sectors, we will aim to fill out our impact across the supply chain and grow into new sectors, especially restaurants and hospitality. Our work in these sectors may look like focusing on portion sizes, getting away from buffets, planning low waste events, educating consumers, among many other strategies. Work has already begun in these streams, and I encourage everyone to check out our case studies on consumer-facing messaging that was piloted by our food service signatories last year. You can find it on the PCFWC website. And an insightful low waste event case study done on GreenBiz and the Hyatt in Seattle. So if you got upset by the amount of bread rolls going to waste at your last conference, this is the case study for you. A key tactic we'll take is to engage with coalitions, associations, and trade groups, bringing them on board as signatories and utilizing these existing platforms for reaching broader swaths of the market. We mentioned healthcare without harm earlier, but we are already actively engaging with multiple other similar groups that we also call one-to-many partners, in that through working with one, we can reach many. Where we can, we believe it makes sense to engage through these collaborative forums that businesses are already a part of and leverage the leadership of these coalitions. We are grateful to the individuals from the Food Industry Association and the American Hotel and Lodging Association, for example, for joining our advisory council. I want to emphasize too that our philosophy when it comes to signatory growth is not a gotta catch 'em all approach. Rather, we seek to partner with businesses and coalitions who are truly ready to dive into action and develop meaningful stakeholder relationships. To support signatory engagement and progress, we will engage with the public sector and encourage public-private collaboration and dialogue. There are many cities and states with strong food loss and waste initiatives across the country. We will seek to complement and amplify their efforts, and the Pact will seek to support unifying and standardizing these regional efforts with food businesses on a national scale. while recognizing that these local initiatives have some of the greatest power to develop relationships and see the most immediate on-the-ground impact. We will also work with groups like the Zero Food Waste Coalition and align our strategy with national and federal players such as the EPA and USDA, who have strong food loss and waste programs and funding opportunities in place. A third stakeholder category that we plan to explore engagement with are solution providers. And under this broad category of solution providers, we're including nonprofits that are working on solutions to waste, food banks, compost and anaerobic digestion facilities, upcycling companies, technology-focused companies providing new ways of measuring waste, planning procurement, marking down prices, etc. It's really a very broad category. But our goal will be to establish more standardized ways for solution providers to engage in the pact. And I've put a special call out here because we do hope that everyone on this call will be in touch with us and provide us their feedback through the survey that we're going to send at the end or through the Q&A now or in future emails. But if you are a solution provider, even though we don't have a formalized ways for you to participate currently, please, we do want to issue a special encouragement to reach out to us and let us know how would you want to be engaged in the pact and what value could you see in participating? What kinds of conversations, pilots, or initiatives could you see being useful? And finally, we turn to bringing our work to the consumer perspective. According to ReFed's data, as Jackie shared at the beginning, residential waste makes up nearly half of the United States surplus food. We will be engaging with businesses to identify the steps they can take to affect household or consumer waste, whether it be through improved date labeling, packaging, portion sizes, education, the list goes on. And we will support groups that are leading efforts in consumer-facing campaigns. We do not plan for the pact to be directly interacting with consumers ourselves. There are many groups and jurisdictions that are doing excellent work in this arena already, and we plan to lean into that expertise and momentum, seeking to complement the work underway in this sphere as we bring businesses in to play their role shaping consumer environments. But one tangible step we will explore taking in the short term is to extend our whole chain projects, which Anne gave an overview of, to include analysis of the impact on consumer waste. For example, consumer perceptions of food freshness or quality are often pointed to as the ultimate driver of food waste, whether it be a theorized unwillingness to buy imperfect produce or a misperception of quality and food safety. At the buffet, this might look like a consumer perception that overabundance is better. So we can't start to change many of these business practices without taking these consumer perceptions into account. And our whole chain projects are a good place to integrate this into our strategies for reducing waste around a particular product. So that is a summary of the framework we will set in our roadmap to 2030 for engaging businesses and other stakeholders. And I wanted to just end with this slide because as we continue down this path, we will ally ourselves and learn from international partners who are running similar business-oriented voluntary agreements. The Australian Food Pact, the Cortal Agreement, Pacto por la Comida. These are all partners that we have been in communication with and will continue to learn from. And I think it's inspiring to know that while our focus is national, we are in this broader global ecosystem that's fostering change. So thank you, and we are now looking forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Tara. I hope that you all can hear me. So thank you, Tara, for that overview. And also thank you, Anne and Jackie, for your sections as well. And a big thanks to all of you for tuning in and absorbing all that we had to say. So now we would love to get your feedback in a couple of different ways. So we'll be starting the Q&A section in just a moment, but this is the QR code that we have been referencing to the 3-question survey. We really, really value your feedback. So you can use the QR code. It's going to be on the next several slides as well. And hopefully maybe someone is also sharing a link in the chat. So easy access. But like I said, we'll also be emailing this out in a follow-up email, and hopefully it'll be on our website as well. So while you are getting that pulled up, we will move into the Q&A portion, which I'm excited to see. We've collected so many questions, so thank you for sharing those. So we'll just start with the first one I've got here, which is for anybody. What distinguishes a Food Waste Pact coalition member and signatory?
I can jump in on that just and expand on maybe what I started saying during my portion of the presentation earlier. So, Anne, I think, showed the slide of all of our signatories. So we do engage primarily waste generating food businesses. So that includes manufacturers, distributors, retail, restaurant, food service, et cetera. They are really the core, what we have called signatories to date within the US Food Waste Pact. They're the ones who are submitting data to us. They're the ones that are participating individually in pilot projects and working groups. Coalition partners are a brand new group we're coming in where they are basically an individual organization that represents a membership base. So Healthcare Without Harm is a great example. They are an organization that represents thousands of individual hospitals. There's likely not a reality in the short term that we would have 40,000 hospitals joining the US Food Waste Pact, but we want to be able to both benefit from their learnings and insights and knowledge of their business while also being able to scale and share the work that we're doing through that network. So the power, I think, in these coalition partners are really expanding the reach and impact in both directions of feasibly being able to have a two-way value exchange between those who are engaging with the pact.
Oh, go ahead, Tara.
Oh, no, I just was gonna follow up to sharing more about how we're engaging with other partners as well. I saw that there was that question around researchers, academics, donation partners, et cetera. So this is something that, I think we're hoping to dive more into as we're thinking through our roadmap to 2030. Currently, the way we're engaging with them is by, bringing them into the conversation, leaning on their expertise to understand what are the challenges out there, what are the potential solutions, engaging with them in pilot projects as well, right? We've brought many researchers and experts in the field on as consultants to our pilot projects. Donation partners getting wrapped up and engaged in our pilot projects with businesses. But this is something that we do want to focus on in the coming months ahead, thinking about how do we bring these groups in a more formal way to the pact? How can we kind of better give them a seat at the table to help inform the discussions that we're having with businesses so that they can benefit from a wider variety of perspectives.
Awesome. Thanks for those answers. Hopefully we answered fully, but always feel free to ask another follow-up on that. Switching gears a little bit, our next question will be, are there any courses, trainings, or internships that can be joined? Anne, maybe you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, so I think this is somewhat of the spirit of the toolkit that we're generating, is that would be a resource, and that will have some training offered with it, so that it's we're not going to leave you high and dry with just a piece of paper. We want to help you understand what it means and what it entails to deploy. That will very much benefit the individuals in organizations or who support organizations in the deployment of food loss and waste work. I think on the other points of courses, internships, or projects, it's going to depend on who you are and what your point of engagement. As Tara alluded to, many of our projects are executed by consultants with expertise, whether it be in whole chain, supply chain expertise, or whether it's in behavioral change in terms of employee engagement. So engagement in projects typically comes through being a consultant. But we do have a history, both ReFed and WWF, of bringing on interns to support very targeted and specific work. So I think there's just a number of opportunities, but I would say, as Tara's kind of alluded to, the formalness of these opportunities is something that we'll be working on going into 2025 and going forward. I don't know if Tara or Jackie have anything to add to that.
Great. Well, Tara?
I think just that, again, kind of putting a plug in for filling out our survey with that kind of information, or emailing us later with your ideas. We're always open to, some of our pilot projects have come from kind of community members speaking up about particular issues or opportunities that they see needing to be tested. So reach out.
I think on the pilot project front, We have another question here. How can I do a pilot project with the U.S. Food Waste Pact? And then what would any cost be to that?
I can jump in again, but yeah, Anne, definitely help me answer this one. So and maybe we can give some background as to how our pilot projects typically get started. Usually we use our business working groups and sector summits as a boilerplate space for coming up with the ideas around pilot projects. What are the innovative solutions that need to be tested? What's kind of their biggest pain points as well in the field? And so it's usually a very business-driven motivation, our pilot project focus areas. And then we are fortunate in that we have philanthropic funding that helps us cover the costs of bringing in outside technical experts to help with running the pilot projects as well. So there is no cost to the participants in the pilot project.
Would say I would add to that, no dollar cost, but we definitely, in partnering with the businesses and their staff and their employees, there is a commitment on their part from a time and energy standpoint. Like they partner by showing up and being an active participant in the pilots, while the funding for any technical expertise is something that comes from the philanthropic dollars that Tara just referenced.
Great. Shifting gears a little bit, again, sort of back on the broad list of stakeholders that the Pact works with. I'm actually going to read this directly because I feel like it has a lot of really good context in it. So thank you to whoever put this in the chat. I am aware of the USDA/EPA US Champions program that enrolls businesses in the fight against food waste. And I'm wondering if you can speak more generally about how you are working with existing initiatives like this. So maybe back to that slide earlier in the presentation about the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can start on that one and invite Tara and Anne to jump in too, which yeah, that slide I think was really exciting to put together and also intimidating because like there's no way we could fit everything on there. All to say that there's so much good work happening in the space. Specifically to speak to your example, and this perhaps is a proxy for others too, I think is there are so many programs like the EPA USDA Champions program that have been really great conveners for food businesses in the space to come and actually have a reason to put a commitment behind something. And so that I think is really actually a lot of the inspiration for the work that we're doing is how do we build on the momentum where businesses have started to make, and others have started to make those commitments and actually enable some of the what and the how behind that, right? So that the commitment's there, how can we figure out where we're starting? How can we figure out how fast we have to move? That's really the data work that we do through the Pact. How can we actually start reducing waste through different solutions? What are others doing that I could also be doing and learn from? That's probably one of the most common questions we get, right? What are others doing? What are my peers doing that I could be doing? So I think it's really building on the momentum of other platforms that are bringing people in to make commitments and hoping to add some direction on the what and the how, and then sharing that back out. I think we really hope to make a lot of the resources and tools and processes that perhaps start within the Pact available to others that are working in the space within their own networks, whether there's overlap or not with those who are in the Pact, and really hopefully facilitate some of that resource sharing. To Anne's point about urgency, we don't have time to reinvent the wheel 30 more times on specific projects. So where we can be sharing some of that and hoping to increase the momentum, I think is where we'd want to go. Great question. That was, yeah, thank you for asking that.
I have a little bit, I feel like it's sort of related, and it came in, I think, recently, but there's always this question about consumers, and I know that Tara, you talked a little bit about consumers in your part of the presentation. In what ways can organizations that either the Pact is working with or perhaps not working with address personal household behavioral change?
That is a good question. I'm happy to kick off again. I'm sure there'll be multiple opinions on this. So, and I'll put my refed hat on maybe for a second for this question when we think about consumer food waste and how we think about it often, because direct consumer engagement and consumer education is a really key part of the solution. It's also very hard, right? I think there are many people in chat who have probably actively done work here and could talk about how hard it is to do that. So when we think about how we engage with our core and our members within the pact and whatnot, it's really how we talk about consumer environments. And that's a very intentional language use where it's how can we actually shift the environments in which consumers shop, eat, cook, etc., and actually make it hard for them to waste food, right? How can we build in the processes or infrastructure, information that drives them to make decisions that are naturally less waste oriented? And so Tara can maybe build on this too when she talked about, I don't think we're going to go actively engage directly with consumers, but so much of the work we do in the supply chain has impacts and should have impacts on how consumers feel about and make decisions about food waste at the end of the day. Tara Ann, I don't know if you want to add on to that at all.
Yeah, just that the work that we're doing is especially focused on how can businesses, especially at the point of sale, right, be focused on helping educate consumers around maybe this packaging change that you're seeing is because it helps keep food fresher for longer, right? Or maybe encouraging, when you're at the buffet to really just take what you're planning to eat. So we're really being focused on what are the successful kind of behavior change and consumer messaging opportunities at those points of sale.
I think I'll add to that. I think this is one of the real strengths of the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment is that it brought the collaboration between jurisdictions and the signatories. And so I think we have some opportunities to showcase some of the work that's happened where that consumer engagement is happening through a shared effort where it is stores and jurisdictions trying to bring a message around behavior change to the consumers, regardless of where they shop, but based on where they shop and geographically where they reside. So I think there'll be some exciting things you can see next year when we start to highlight some of that work that's gone on. Again, we're not talking to the consumers, but we're helping highlight how organizations and jurisdictions are talking to consumers. So I think that's something to look for as well in the future.
I knew there'd be a lot of answers to that consumer question. I know that it's always a hot and interesting topic. So thank you, all three of you, for taking that on. I'm going to jump to a data-based question because a key part of the pact is data. And it's a simple one, but maybe not so simple also. Is there any ambition to create a baseline anytime soon?
That is a not simple question. Well phrased, Nia. Yeah, and I would love to follow up with the person who asked this once, if I'm not answering your question fully or if you have more specific questions. So we will be publishing probably Q1 of next year, our first Pact annual report, which will have data in it from some of our subsets of our signatories who are anonymously and in aggregate reporting data. So in that regard, that will be kind of our Pact baseline that year over year we look forward to reduce. It is building on the amazing data work that the PCFWC has run for 5 years now in retail, where we have a lot more longitudinal data of what's been happening year over year. So yes, we do aim to build on that, and that will kind of act as the baseline. What you may be asking that we are not looking to do at this point is actually retroactively going back in time necessarily to when a lot of companies perhaps started working on food waste back in 2015, 2016, 2019, and building from there. Our initial short-term efforts will be really starting with the now and building going forward.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. Moving, well, we've sort of touched on it in all the questions, honestly. But I'm going to ask this question. When considering entrepreneurship in food waste, which areas do you feel are particularly ripe for entrepreneurial solutions that are not currently being met by existing solutions?
That's
Oh,
a good one.
yeah.
Anne or Tara, do you maybe, is one potential way to start answering that? Do you maybe want to talk about some of the pilot ideas we've had circling around? And then I think the short answer is there's a lot, right? I think that's the beauty of food waste is we're not waiting for a silver bullet. We have so many solutions and there's so many more solutions out there. But yeah, Anne and Tara, I don't know if you have specific answers or maybe as a proxy, we kind of talk through some of the ideas that we have floating around.
Yeah, gosh. I think it's like that are not being met by existing solutions. There's a lot of solutions out there, right? But then whether they can be adopted or not, there'll be a multitude of reasons for why they're not being adopted. Consumers aren't ready for imperfect produce, or there's not the business case for making this a cycled product or using this markdown technology or this form of packaging, right? So even if the solutions are out there, we find that just getting the momentum sometimes to create that business case is all part of the challenge. And so that's why we do these pilot projects and then public facing case studies to try and prove out, right, a certain methodology. But yeah, I think, and we can just kind of talk about some of like the areas that we're thinking about going towards in the future is we do want to do a lot more of these whole chain pilot projects, looking at particular commodities, right, from farm to the consumer level, because those can really help highlight, okay, where's the greatest waste occurring? And then what are the solutions that maybe require the whole supply chain to agree to or to buy into, right? To implement. And then we have to follow different strategies at each part of the supply chain to make that solution feasible. Just again, to kind of turn to our strawberry case study, we found that the greatest amount of food waste occurred on the farm, and there was a lot of it being strawberries that were too small or just this quote unquote imperfect, right? So how do we get that into fresh channels that warrant the farmer getting them out of the field, right? Gives a great enough return on investment, but that consumers or food service companies can accept these strawberries as well, that they're the quality that they can work with. So that's kind of a really exciting area that we're focusing in on. And it's not that it's necessarily a different technology, maybe in this case, that doesn't exist in the field yet, but it's maybe a new way of framing our culture, right, and kind of consumer messaging around what we're willing to eat and see on our plate.
I think the one thing I would add to what Tara just shared is there's the educating the consumer on the way the packaging presents the food that they're buying in a new and unique way, but it's also helping the businesses and their extended suppliers understand why we want a different size packaging or a different material such that they can understand the value of making the investment in new machinery, new technology to support the change. It's very much an ecosystem solution. Even though the problem might be isolated in a single point or found in a single point. So there is that extended dialogue that needs to happen to help everybody understand why there's the reason and the value to step up to an opportunity.
Great. Thank you, guys. I know these are good, challenging questions because this is a good, challenging problem. I'm going to ask one more question. I do think we have time for one more, but if you are panicking and want to ask another question on the following slides, we'll have plenty of ways to get in touch, so don't worry. Final question is sort of a future-oriented one, which I think is a good one to end on. So this person knows that the PACT is not a lobbying organization, but they've asked what our wish list for federal or state legislation might be.
Yeah, great question. And I would actually, if you haven't already, encourage whoever asked this and anyone else interested, especially in the policy side, to look at the Zero Food Waste Coalition. There's a lot of great content and recommendations and details about policies, the implications they may have on food waste and how policies can influence food waste specifically. I'd say with our PACT and business hats on a little bit, where we're interested in looking is how can we remove barriers to action, I think, right? So where are there ways that we are encountering challenges with either adopting or scaling solutions that could have a policy solution to it? A very timely example of this for those following policy in the last couple of weeks is around standardized date labeling, right? The reality of implementing that solution right now is very challenging because the state level regulation does not match how businesses operationally produce and label food. And so that is just a barrier that exists that I think there have been efforts for a long time, and there's hopefully now some momentum moving where we can overcome some of those barriers. But yeah, a lot of more great content coming out of the Zero Food Waste Coalition for sure.
Awesome. Any further thoughts on that? Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up our Q&A portion, but like I said, this is not the final way to reach us. We've got plenty of calls to action here that I'm going to go through. Do want to thank you for putting your questions in the chat and the Q&A feature right now during the presentation. But a couple of things that you can do to stay up to date. First, follow us on social media. We've got our Twitter X handle here, and also we're really active on LinkedIn. So that's probably like the best way to follow us for up-to-date information. If you have a specific question, Jackie and Tara's emails are currently on the screen, so you can feel free to reach out to them. My email is going to be on the next slide, so you can reach out to me too. We are pretty accessible, I think. So feel free to ask further specific questions there. You can also visit our website, which is usfoodwastepact.org. And we've got lots of resources, news. The recording of this webinar will be there. So all kinds of resources that you can find there. And then you can also fill out our contact form there, and that's to get involved with the Pact in any way that you wish to. And then finally, one last plug for the survey. The QR code is up on the screen, and then the link is also on the screen, and I know that it's been shared in the chat as well. So the conversation does not end here. Please feel free to reach out. And with that, our very first town hall comes to a close. I know I've said it a couple of times, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to hear all about the U.S. Food Waste Pact, and we are particularly grateful that you've shared your questions and feedback with us. Like I said, our website, social media are the best places to stay up to date. And if you have a question, please feel free to email any of us. Otherwise, in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you at our next town hall.